Welcome to a Leader's Journey podcast. I'm your host, Joel Gunn.
Excited to have Kevin Miller back on the show with me. Kevin, welcome back.
Hey, Joel. Good to be back.
You had a LinkedIn post the other day that actually prompted me to reach back out. You mentioned a story about a bilge plug. You want to unpack that for us?
Yeah, what a setup, right? Bilge plug. Most people may not even have a clue what that is. So I can try to explain that a little bit. So on a boat at the back of the transom at the very bottom, there's a bilge drain that after you go boating and you take on waves and water, the boat has to drain naturally. So when you take it out of the ramp and take it onto dry land, you pull that plug out so that the water can drain as you're towing it. And I have a pretty severe case of ADHD, which I use as a superpower now. But when we owned our boat, it was one of the things that frustrated me the most is because I would always forget to put it back in before we would launch. And we always discovered that I had forgotten to put it back in when we were about a couple hundred yards from the ramp and noticed that the back end of the boat was starting to dip. So it was always a mad scramble with my wife and my boys to try to figure out how to get that bilge plug back in while we were still moving. Because the thing that we found is that if we stopped the boat to put it in, it actually, took on water even faster. And so I was thinking about that story the other day because I was looking at some pictures of us boating, and I was thinking about some organizational dynamics that I'm helping clients with right now. And I think my brain only thinks in metaphors and analogies, so that just kind of popped in. And I was like, hey, this actually was it's kind of a good leadership lesson around change management, innovation, and how to navigate through that as an organization. So that's kind of where that LinkedIn post came from.
Yeah, so speaking of change management, most organizations probably don't do it well. At least that's been my observation as a whole.
Mm-hmm.
What do you see that this bilge plug analogy, where does that start to fit into this idea of change management?
Well, I think when it comes down to leadership, I think it's so easy when something happens, you hit some headwinds, you hit a speed bump, you hit something in the organization or in the growth that catches you off guard or was unexpected, or a problem that surfaces. And I think, the issue is when leadership says, well, wait a minute, we got to stop doing everything that we're doing and focus 100% on fixing this leak or this problem. That drag, that momentum stopping is actually what creates more problems. So it's asking the question of, the pause worth the cost? Is the pause worth the solution? And how much is this going to be putting us back? So, what I've found in change management, especially, is if you wait for it to be perfect, it's never going to be perfect. And so what that puts you in is a constant state of trying to play catch up. And that is never good for any organization, as we've seen, the famous examples of Nokia and when they stopped innovation on their phones to try to perfect their OS, and Apple and Google and Android just, blew right past them. Blockbuster wanting research streaming before they jumped in and then got passed up. Kodak, there's numerous big name examples of organizations that decided to stop the boat and pause everything to try to fix those problems or to come up with that solution. And what happened is they took on water and ended up going out. And so what we've found is that I think teams move at 80% efficiency. So if you can move at an 80% mark and continue with your change and your innovation and progress and growth, that 80% allows you to actually move forward while you're still fixing the problems. But it's the leaders that fall into the trap of, I think, they feel like, man, if we don't do everything right, or if we don't get everything perfect before we do this thing or launch this new product or go to market with this thing that we've created, if we don't get it perfect, it's somehow going to fail. And what we've seen is that organizations that get it at least 80% right and then iterate and fix as they're going, they tend to be the ones that can navigate that change management a lot more efficiently and a lot better.
Yeah, if you, going back to your bilge plug, if you're new to boating and you see the boat filling with water, and hey, there's a plug that's missing, well, everybody stop, let's find the plug, let's run over there and plug it. But like you said, experience teaches you start sinking faster.
Yeah.
Right. And so it's only when you're able to use your brain and let that overcome the fear of the moment and say, no, we've got to keep at least some decent speed and we'll actually take on less water. And I think the same thing happens in business is we run into something we've not seen before and like, wait, we got to stop everybody focus on this. Let's get it fixed, right? And I think that's where entrepreneurs probably have an advantage over, say, a little bit larger companies or mid-sized companies, because they're used to everything being chaotic.
Yeah.
It's once a little bit of structure starts to come around and we start to formalize things that maybe we're a little more at risk.
Yeah, it's interesting when this happened. I have two sons, and who you've met, Joel, and when we were boating, they were fairly young. Probably when we had our boat, I think they were maybe 10 or 12 years old. And the first couple of times it happened, it's embarrassing to say the first couple of times because it happened a lot. But the first couple of times it happened, it was pure panic on the boat. Like, we were running around trying to figure out what's happening. Where are we sinking? We're looking on the side of the boat. And then after this became a good practice, we really built a resilient family team on that boat when it happened, because we knew what it was. And my older son would grab the wheel, my wife would navigate and make sure we weren't going to hit anything, and I would hang over the back of the boat and put the bilge plug in as we were kind of slowly moving along. And I think that's an important kind of a little bit of an analogy or a metaphor as well, is that we didn't gun the throttle, right? We didn't say, okay, great, full speed ahead, let's while we're trying to fix this. But we also didn't stop, because we realized when we stopped that it did start sinking. So we had this kind of resilient team that we knew, okay, this has happened. We've had this issue. Everybody's got a role. Everybody's got something to do in the organization. So that, that makes kind of that jump to a company or a business or a culture, is that if you build a team around you who understand, okay, it's never going to be perfect. We're never going to have smooth sailing all the way. There's always going to be something that happens. But if they're conditioned to say, okay, great, this is another thing we just have to fix while we're moving. Everybody understands their role. They're good with that. That culture, that velocity that you create in a culture really is what we have seen in top performing organizations. And so you want your top performers, and this comes from the top down, to be okay with things that are going to pop up. And as you know, the way business changes these days, there is no such thing as an even path. Even being a strategist, I tell people, like, the 5-year strategy is like non-existent anymore. Nobody can predict 5 years into the future anymore, or set a plan that has an 80% certainty of being exactly as you lay it out, because things are so VUCA right now with the volatility and uncertainty that's happening in the marketplace. Everything's going to change. So are you building an organization around you and leaders around you that understand, okay, great, we forgot the bilge plug, or we hit rocks and now we're taking on water. How are we going to fix this as we're still moving forward?
Do you find there's a set of tools that helps in this change management? Is it a mindset? Is it a philosophy? How do you transfer that into an organization that's just used to the chaotic?
Yeah, I think it starts with the team that you have around you, right? So if you have chicken littles on your team, that every time something pops up, the whole world is falling apart, and there's chaos, that everybody in the organization senses, that it causes the top performers in the organization to want to leave, because most of them are built for motion. They're not built for stagnation. They want to move forward. They don't want to stop. And it actually ends up destroying the culture that you're trying to fix with that. So I think it starts with leaders. I think it also has high importance on having a regular sequence of strategic planning and adjustment that will take care of not just waiting until once a year to do, a 2-day offsite and do your strategic planning, but that there's a constant revisiting and adjustment on the strategic plan that you've created, and being okay with making it shift. I think sometimes what I've seen with many leaders that I work with is they almost feel like this sense of guilt if they have to change the strategy that they laid out. And this is even a case with me being a strategist for hire, is I will always tell clients when I build a strategy for them that none of this is written in stone. Like, I'm not descending from the clouds with tablets here. All of this could change depending on what happens with market dynamics and adjustments and, cultural things that happen, or economic headwinds. There's going to be adjustments. Do you have a rhythm in place with your team to make those adjustments on the fly while still making forward progress? And it's not about abandoning your goals. It's not about saying, okay, well, that got too hard, so let's give up on it. It's just about being able to make those small pivots and being agile enough to do that as you're moving forward and making progress.
Something you said triggered this thought. Strategic plan versus strategic direction. Are they the same thing? Are they different?
I mean, it's the old leadership dynamic of the commander's intent, right? The commander says, I want you to take that hill, troops. And the troops, and they lay out a plan, right? Okay, we're going to go here. We're going to flank here. We're going to go up the hill. We're going to take that. We're going to do this. And that's how they're going to get to take the hill. And then something happens, right? Somebody shoots from somewhere else, you get flanked by another platoon. The goal is not that you run back to the general and say, what do you want us to do now? The goal is to say, okay, great. We still need to take the hill, but we've encountered some obstacles. How are we going to get around those as a team while still maintaining the strategic direction in our sights? And so that's something that I think as teams figure out, what does that look like for them? How do you make those pauses? How do you make the adjustments? But again, if you just stop right on the hill and you say, I guess we hit our first obstacle, so until we can figure out how to get around this, we're not going to do anything else. We know what the outcome of that is as well. And so nobody wants to be in an organization where they have that sinking feeling. I always say momentum is morale. So, if you stop and you say, okay, nobody's doing anything, we're freezing hiring, we're not launching that product now, we're doing something else instead, everybody in the organization feels that. And so when they feel the water rushing in during those stops, that's when you see they start to develop some cultural collateral damage. And that's what you have to avoid at all costs, is really building a culture where every time something happens that everybody wants to stop, because that sinking feeling that you get as a team it'll really put you so far behind. And again, those top performers, that they see momentum as what they're there for. They want to move, they want to go, they don't want to be stagnant. They're going to be the first ones to go. So it's just about making sure that you're building that type of culture. And if you're using tools and frameworks on strategic planning and adjustment, still keeping the end in mind, right? Still keeping the mission, still keeping the vision, still keeping your strategic direction in mind, but knowing that you're going to have to adjust your plans. And we're seeing that happen almost monthly at this point, where there's small tweaks and adjustments to the plan based on what pops up.
I think you used the word pause a moment ago. What's the difference between or is there a difference between like a strategic pause? My team's been going at it hard for the last quarter. They need a couple of weeks just to catch their breath, versus the context you said it in was a negative, pause, stop the boat to go find the plug kind of thing. Is there a difference?
Yeah, I think so. I think it's in the allocation of who's the one, like, me hanging off the back of the boat trying to put in the bilge plug while, my wife and my son are still steering the boat forward. So I think where it becomes dangerous is when you say, everybody stop what you're doing. We're not doing anything until we get this, leak plugged. That's when you start to see dangerous consequences, because even the people that aren't involved with fixing the plug are going to be standing around going, well, wait a minute, I can still be doing the things that I was doing, because that leak doesn't necessarily affect me or the initiatives that I have or the goals that we have or the KPIs or OKRs that we're going after. But I think there's this tendency with leaders to say, everybody stop. Like, this is crisis, right? And there are going to be those where you will need to have the organization take a breath and take a pause. But I think what you're talking about are more what I would say planned pauses. So saying, okay, we're going to go hard for the next quarter to achieve this goal or this OKR that we've got in front of us. But then we're also going to test that, see how it lands in the marketplace. We're going to focus on, culture and giving people rest in that time. Those are planned strategic pauses. What I'm talking about are the reactionary pauses, where the first time something pops up, that it's just, okay, stop, everybody stop, don't do anything until we fix this. And that kind of collective panic is where I've seen organizations really just get off track.
Have you seen, we were talking just before the show about one of your son's career paths. Have you seen people that just are addicted to the firefighting mode?
Yes. And I think that those organizations, our mutual friend Mike Sharrow talks about the J curve and living in the J curve, and knowing that there are some people that are just wired. I'm one of those people. I'm wired for the problems and the solving of the problems and the firefighting. And there are some that aren't as wired for that. But I think in today's business environment, there is no such thing as just a steady track. And so you have to have at least some people on your team who are willing to jump in and deal with those things. And, my two sons, one's One's chosen the fire and medical service, the other is an ICU nurse. And so, yes, they're like me, where they love to jump into the middle of unknown and fix things, and they thrive in that. I thrive in that as well. But then you also have to have people on your team who are the planners and have the ability to see a strategic plan and execute at a high level. And they're not always attracted to the firefighting mode, but they can navigate through the firefighting mode without panic, without stagnation, without paralysis by analysis. I think that is the biggest thing that I've seen in teams, is when you have all firefighters on the team, then you're kind of seeking out the fires because that's what excites you, or sometimes creating the fires.
Usually there's an arson in the group.
Yeah, there's an arson in the group. They enjoy that. But then also, if you have a lot of people who are not wanting to solve those problems and they want to pause, that's when you start to see organizational death. And, there's an S-curve model that I use with clients where it shows the growth, and you hit a certain inflection point with your organization where you've got the opportunity to either scale the organization. So you've run into an inflection point in the organization, you can go up and scale. If you stay flat and you just chase tactics, that's where you kind of just stay on this flat track where you're just recycling tactics. But if you don't do anything, if you make no change, and if you make no adjustments to what you're doing, there's this path to obsolescence that is just unavoidable. And I think there's a point of no return for many organizations where once you get past that point of obsolescence, it's almost impossible to turn around and go the other way without just some absolute massive drastic changes or overhauls to the organization. So I think it's just how leadership teams navigate through those inflection points is really what makes a resilient, agile organization.
So say somebody's viewing this podcast or listening to it, and some of what you're saying is striking home, but they're not sure where to go next. What are your thoughts? How do they start to wrestle with this? Are they stopping the boat too much? Are they full throttle? Both are not good in a situation that needs to find the bilge plug.
Yeah, this is going to sound like a shameless plug, but it's get an outside view. Sometimes bringing somebody in from the outside to take a look at what you're doing and to be able to see those things, to be able to look at the boat and go, it's just your bilge plug. That's your only issue, right? You didn't run aground. You don't have a massive hole in the side. You really just need to put the bilge plug back in. And, that's where that kind of unfiltered, unbiased, raw view from the outside in will really help, is to say, I've looked at everything on the boat. Everything else is fine. You've just got this bilge plug, and here's how you allocate the resources to take that $10 part and just push it back into the bilge drain hole. And it's that simple. And a lot of times, organizations kind of overinflate, and leadership teams overinflate where the problems are. And it all comes down to one issue, right? So they look at the symptoms and they say, there's water in our boat and we're not moving fast enough, and it feels sluggish and the engine's trying harder than it should. And you're like, well, of course your bilge plug is out, right? So a lot of times it's just a simple solution, but they've put so many symptoms as to what they think the problem is, when in reality it's one simple solution. I've seen that happen time and time again. But until you have somebody come in and go, okay, you guys keep moving while we evaluate, and let's see what we can find. And they would never find that on their own, right? They would look everywhere else but where the simple solution would be. So I would say if you're stuck and you keep trying things and nothing's working, that's the time where it's probably a good time for you to bring somebody in from the outside who lives in those J-curve moments and can analyze what's happening and give you an honest evaluation and truthful assessment of where the real issue lies.
Yeah, there's a concept called the theory of constraints, written by Elihu Goldratt, a gentleman out of Israel. He's passed, but his kids are still running the business and training companies around the world with this mindset. And you can actually improve the business in places that has zero impact to the bottom line or to forward motion.
Mm-hmm.
And so that particular methodology teaches you to look for where are your bottlenecks in the business, whether that's in paper or manufacturing or somewhere in the office, your computer system, whatever it may be. Where's that bottleneck? And let's fix that bottleneck. And that frees up, all kinds of, lets things start flowing much better in the organization. But so often, in the example we're using of the bilge plug, well, the engine's sluggish. Oh, well, we need to give the engine an overhaul. Let's start with an oil change. Somebody check the spark plugs, right?
Right.
And so you go optimize the engine, and you're still taking on water because you misdiagnose yeah, maybe it was time for a tune up on the engine. But at the moment, that wasn't the issue. So I've been in those situations myself, as you have been over
Mhm.
the years, going into an organization, and sometimes it is a simple fix. And so that outside pair of eyes often does help. Another reason to be involved in a good peer group,
Oh,
whether that
absolutely.
be an industry peer group or something like C20 and so many others out there, where you've got friends at the table that get to know you and can challenge you. But yeah, the outside expert, a lot of companies say, well, it's so expensive. Sometimes it's just way cheaper bring in somebody that knows what they're doing in the long run.
Yeah,
But
I agree.
Kevin, any final thoughts as we wrap up this episode?
No, I think, this conversation has played out a couple of times even since I made that LinkedIn post around people reaching out and saying, "Hey, interesting. I think we're kind of dealing with this right now where we can't find the bilge plug, right? Like we didn't know that there was that little $10 part that's causing all of this issue." So, I appreciate you, inviting me to talk about this because I think it is, the analogy or the metaphor of this really does apply in so many organizations. And so hopefully it just allows people to go, yeah, wait a minute, let me lift my head up and from the day to day and go, yeah, I think there's something here we need to evaluate because it shouldn't be this hard, or we should be able to get further than this, or what's holding us back from the growth that we can expect, or the things we put in place to create the growth. So hopefully this just resonates with somebody, and that visual picture just helps them understand what might be happening in their organization, and they can take the steps to fix it.
Hey, I have an idea for some new swag. Go buy some bilge plugs and put your logo on it.
Yeah, that's talk about a shameless plug. That's a bad joke. I'll see myself out. Um, but yeah, I think it's a good visual because sometimes it is something just as simple as that little tiny rubber part.
All right, brother. Thank you for your time. Have a great week.
Yeah, thanks, Joel. Thanks for having me.
Chat soon. Bye bye.
Thanks for joining us for this episode of A Leader's Journey podcast. If you enjoyed it, give us a thumbs up and remember to subscribe to our channel.